Fast Company Innovation Festival with such an important and timely session. The state of stakeholder capitalism, in defense of stakeholder capitalism, which is a defensive title, and we'll get into why that is. But this is a movement to which you are both deeply committed, Dan as the CEO of PayPal, Lynn as an investor who has been talking about these ideas for many years. I'd like to start by asking you just a table-setting question. It's been 3 years since the Business Roundtable issued its statement redefining the purpose of a corporation to serve all stakeholders, employees, customers, suppliers, communities, not just shareholders. Broadly speaking, how would you both characterize the success of the movement during those 3 years, and where do we find ourselves now? Lynn, why don't you start?
Age before beauty. We didn't have a dress code memo, you see. So he's the cool kid, and I'm 1980s Park Avenue. So I apologize. We need a theme. Can you brief?
I'm like 1995, suit and shirt guy.
Yeah. So sorry, we'll get that right next time. And it is nice to be back because both of us were at the last time that this conference met in person. So thank you. The famous BRT letter. I remember the day. Well, I remember getting some calls saying something really big is going to happen. It's going to make you really happy, and it did make me really happy. I thought it was a great statement. In an ideal world as I see it, it would be better if capitalism didn't need a qualifier, that if capitalism was simply understood to be a system that creates broad-based prosperity. But the truth is that pretty much since the 80s, that sense of broad-based potential for anyone who believed what I did growing up, which is in America, you work hard, you play by the rules, and you can go as far as your dreams take you, because this is America, and America is its form of great capitalism. You realize by 2019 that wasn't the case for a lot of people. So that letter was an important statement, and it made everyone feel good. One thing that was Harvard Law School subsequently did a study of the signatories, and only 2% of the signatories of the BRT letter had gotten board approval to sign. All the CEOs signed, only 2% board approval. And when I thought about it, there were two reasons for that. Either they just didn't think it was important, and it was just a greenwashing exercise, and Jamie Dimon called them and they signed, and it didn't matter. Or they read it and they said, actually, this is what we do. Customers, employees, communities. And I think there's a viable argument that that's what good companies have always done. There's the 1950-ish credo by Robert Wood Johnson that's now inscribed in granite in the lobby of J&J. Not that J&J is perfect. Guess what? Nobody's perfect. But they had a credo, and it goes something like, our first obligation is to our patients who need our products. Our second obligation is to the nurses and doctors who give our products to customers. Our third is to the communities that allow us to function. And our fourth is to provide a reasonable return to shareholders. So that's kind of a stakeholder model.
Right.
And so it's not really new, but in the 80s, darling St. Milton created this idea that the purpose of a company was to create profit. And then in the 80s, we drove into that. So by driving into that, a lot of bad things happened. A lot of bad things happened for workers. From, you know, I'm a baby boomer, right? So from 1945 to 1979, worker productivity was growing at 100%. Wages, same period, they were growing like 90%. Stock market grew 600%. That was kind of a nice world until 1979. In comes Milton Friedman. In comes Harvard Business School teaching everybody how to increase your margins, offshore your production, get rid of training programs, this and that. And then, so the following period, what happens to workers? Workers have, during 79 to 2020, 80% productivity growth, 18% wage growth, and the stock market's up 800%.
Yep.
So things really went wrong, and that's why the BRT acted.
Right.
So sorry, that was a long answer to a short question.
Dan, let's have you, step in on one of the last things Lynn said there, which was about wage growth, and I know that you have done you have made some bold moves in this area. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say Lynn's opening remarks were right on. I think capitalism is a great system, but it clearly needs an upgrade. Too many people are left out of the system. They struggle to make ends meet every single month. They don't believe in the American dream anymore because they can't imagine that their kids will do better or have a better future than they do. And consequently, when somebody feels the system is not working for them, they tend to radicalize in one way or another. They tend to think about the far right or the far left and associating, not that they necessarily agree with that, but they don't like what it is right now. And so I think this idea of capitalism needing an upgrade is really about how do we strengthen our economy, strengthen our democracy by thinking more broadly as corporations. And to your specific question, I think the number one constituency that I represent is my employees, because everything flows from there. Like if I have great employees that are passionate, that are enthusiastic, that don't want to leave PayPal, believe in our mission, they'll serve customers better. And if we serve customers better, regulators are happy, government officials are happy, shareholders over the medium term are happy. And so I think like you need to put things in order of priority because we have multiple constituencies that we serve as companies and as CEOs. And my view was an investment in our employees is probably the single most impactful investment I can make in the company, more so than putting out a marketing program. That return on investment will be much bigger. And there, that was, first of all, figuring out how do we measure how financially healthy our employees are. People talk about minimum wage, but minimum wage is not good enough because a minimum wage may be good in one part of the country, and that same minimum wage falls far short in another part of the country where living standards are higher. And in different parts of the world, that's clearly the case. And so we put into place a metric, we called it net disposable income, which looks at how much money does an employee have after all of their essential living expenses, taxes, housing, food. And what we found, which was surprising, which is why I say capitalism needs an upgrade, PayPal pays at or above market in every market that we pay. We're a tech company, we pay extremely well. For almost half our population, their net disposable income was between 4% and 6%. That's all they had left over after all their essential living expenses. And we worked with academia and nonprofits, and the minimum that somebody needs to feel financially healthy, financially secure, is 20%. And so we slashed the cost of healthcare benefits, by almost 70%. We gave everybody in the company equity. We raised wages. We put in place a financial education program so that we could start to move towards 20%. And today, we went from 4 to 6%. We're now between 15 and 18% NDI, and with our goal firmly set on 20%.
Okay, thank you. Let's.
Wow.
Let's talk just for a minute about just some of the backlash that we've seen to the idea of stakeholder capitalism, ESG, inclusive capitalism. We have, just today, there's a story in Dealbook about this. There's a story almost every day about this these days. Texas and Florida have recently moved to block state fund managers from considering ESG factors in their portfolio decisions. But this backlash has been building for a while. So I'd love to hear from both of you about sort of when you first started to feel it, and I don't mean necessarily going back to Milton Friedman in the 80s when all these ideas that these ideas are meant to sort of be an antidote to took place, but more recently, since the Business Roundtable statement. Talk a little bit about the dynamic in the politics of our country and the sort of the degree to which opponents of stakeholder capitalism have become emboldened in recent months, years.
And me?
Whichever one.
I'll start, then we'll no doubt add a lot more color to my statement. But I would say, look, we live in an extremely divisive country right now. There is no way that any of us who have major consumer brands can avoid the culture wars. There's no way. You can't have a set of values that you lead your company by without having people who disagree with those set of values. I mean, I could say that air is good for you, and 5% of you will disagree with me for sure. So untrue. Water is way more important, whatever it is. I mean, it's just, no matter what you say, people get upset by it. But that does not obviate your need to live to your set of values as a company. If values are just words on a wall, then you may as well not have them, because then it's just propaganda, and people, think that you're not true to what you stand for. And it is incredibly hard to go and do that. Like, the first thing I remember when we did this is when we withdrew from North Carolina because of this House Bill 2 that had been passed. That, in my reading of House Bill 2, it allowed for discrimination based on someone's sexual orientation or sexual identity. And I just felt that was like anathema to the values of PayPal. And we decided not to expand into North Carolina. It became front page news of the New York Times. It was very lonely for a while. The afternoon of when we announced that, in the morning, I started receiving death threats. I couldn't even go into a bathroom without security for searching in there. And I realized just how divided our country was. There was a time not that long ago where I had to talk to my kids that with the amount of threats that were happening, that if something ever happened to me, that they should know that this is the things that I wanted to go do. And, I don't think about it, to tell you the truth, much. It's like a little like gravity. There are always going to be threats out there. You're always going to take a stand, and people are going to be upset. And we get hit both from the left and the right all the time, which tells me we're probably doing something right in the middle. But it is hard for a company like PayPal to police its network, to make sure nobody can use PayPal or Venmo to raise money for violent things or hatred or racial discrimination. because violence is always coded. Nobody ever says, I'm raising money to kill somebody. They basically say, I want to send $16.88 to you. And 16 is the 16 words of the White Manifesto, and 88 cents is 88, which is the 8th letter of the alphabet, which is H, which is HH, which is Heil Hitler. And that's how they code their violence. You need to know all of that. And then you need to think, where does free speech end and hatred begin? And nobody teaches you that in school. You have to be very thoughtful, very thorough, very rational in your decision. Always err, I think, on the side of free speech. But you have to make tough choices. And I think that's our obligation to go and do that. So it is not easy to go and do this. And that is why you don't have everybody do it all the time. But I think if we care about the values of our country, and I think if we care about our democracy, it is essential for business leaders to stand up and advocate for the values that matter to their company and to them.
So
Lynn,
the answer, so the answer to the backlash is that we need courageous CEOs like Dan, who know what they stand for and they do what's right, regardless of the backlash. So, so that's kind of the ultimate answer. But sadly, there are others, but there are not a lot of them. And I've been involved in this movement to make capitalism work for society so we can keep society together, basically since the financial crisis. But when I look at the backlash, I put it in two buckets. So there's a backlash to ESG, virtue signaling, ESG, greenwashing, and companies that put out glossies but don't do the right thing. So the opposite of Dan, who don't make the right decisions. And I think the backlash, and then also there's the whole category of Wall Street hijacking ESG as a marketing tool, as a product, slapping a label on it, charging a little bit more, and there are figures that ESG is referred to in connection with $73 trillion of assets under management. There are 800 and some odd mutual funds you can take with ESG. So I think that is bad. And I think Gary Gensler is correct to try to make asset managers disclose. When you put ESG on as an asset manager, what are you doing? What conversations are you having with Dan to show what Dan is doing and to satisfy yourself what people are doing on the S, which Dan is the best in the world, and the E, and the G. So I think those criticisms are fair. But then the horrible thing that's happened is just the politicalization of it, of making behavior that tries to make our society better a political act. And that's just really bad news. And that's where I think the solution is brave CEOs who will say, I'll take the punishment if there is any.
Great, thank you. What is the right way to do ESG investing beyond some of the things that you've just said? So what are things that people in your world, for example, do that stand out to you as the model for it? And then if you could expand just a little bit more about some of the things that you see that make you, that really make you roll your eyes, or even worse.
So at Inclusive Capital Partners, we are really focused on the impact companies have on people and planet. And so we start with a value proposition. We're looking for stuff that's cheap. And then we're looking for companies that are going to become more valuable by taking care of people and planet. And that's what we think ESG should be. So essentially, if you're not engaged with a company as much on what their impact is as you are with respect to their financial performance, then you're not doing anything differently, and you're not changing capitalism. So our view of system change is where those metrics around how you treat your people and how you treat your planet become as important as the financials, because they, like Dan said, they drive the financials over the long term, because your satisfied employees, your customers who are loyal to you, your community who won't live without you, that will be long-term value accretive. But I think the way to do ESG is through engagement, to answer your question. And I think if we have to do it on some passive way, I think Gary Gensler's new regulation requiring managers to disclose how they analyze different sectors is really important. But BlackRock sent in an opposition because they said what we do for ESG is proprietary. I think that's baloney. It's not proprietary.
Right. Dan, you talked a little bit about some of the consequences of speaking out. I'd love to ask you about how do you decide which issues to speak out about? There's a lot of things you can speak out about, right? I mean, you probably don't choose every one. So when you are thinking about this, when you're thinking about PayPal's values, your own personal values, and just the sort of choices that you make, what's the process there? How do you think about that?
Well, we dedicate a lot of resource to this, actually, because you want to make decisions based on a set of values that are aligned with your mission as a company. You want to, I think, try to stay away from political decisions. Our mission as a company is to, have financial services to be as inclusive as possible, so that managing and moving money isn't just something for the more affluent, but can be done by those that are less affluent as well. And inclusive, to me, is kind of the thing that drives us as a company, and therefore, our values predominantly center around the fight against any kind of discrimination. And so then we try to be very consistent with that, but not knee-jerk reaction. And I think, I always say this, I was speaking in front of a number of special forces operators, gold medal families who had lost somebody in action, and we're having this kind of conversation. I saw this one gentleman in like the third row, and he did not like any of this. Like, his arms were like this when I was talking about North Carolina, and then I basically said that our decision making, we try to not have it be red or blue, but like the values of red, white, and blue. Like fighting against discrimination is what our country is about. And I said, like all of you do that yourselves. You fight for this country. You fight for a set of values. We may have different values, but we have values together. And I saw him slowly start to uncross his arms. Like, he didn't get up and give me a standing ovation like everyone else did, but he wasn't booing. And he wasn't going to attack me at the end, which I thought was good as well. But I think we try to be very thoughtful on all of these things. Franz, who's sitting right here, and a couple of others, we have a group from both marketing and our compliance and our risk and our brand reputation, and we look at everything that comes up in depth. Like when somebody has a website, like it could be Proud Boys or somebody like that, you have to go into the website. You have to link into the videos. You have to see the videos. You have to see where they link to see, like the website itself could be innocuous, but the stuff that's underneath it could be quite disturbing. And so we spend a lot of time, and we know when we're going to take down a pretty public website from using us to fundraise, that there's going to be backlash on that. But at least I think everybody in the company, and not everybody in the company, by the way, has the same set of values either. We're like 35,000 people across the world. It's a whole set of great different perspectives, and that is part of the strength of PayPal. But we're very consistent on how we act, and people expect that of us, and we try very hard to not get engaged with everything. Like, even though I'm very concerned about, this kind of species, going out of existence stuff, that isn't stuff that we get involved in. It's not part of our mission as a company. So it needs to align with our mission and our values. If it does, though, we will be involved.
A slightly different situation, but you just made an announcement regarding the Phoenix Suns owner, Robert Sarver, who was just punished by the NBA for, based on his behavior that was detailed in a report that just came out, racist comments, other things that had happened over the period of, I believe, a decade or so. He was fined, I believe it was $10 million, and banned for a year. You issued a statement, PayPal issued a statement. Can you tell us about that statement and what went into the thinking behind it?
Yeah. Again, we try to be very thoughtful about it. I spoke with Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner. I spoke with team, people on the team. We had conversations with a lot of them. We're quite close with the team. And they've made a lot of strides in general to have a very inclusive management and an ownership structure. But Robert's remarks and his pattern of behavior were such that we felt like if he came back to the team, that we could not continue our sponsorship of the Suns. We have a lot of respect for the team, a lot of respect for what they've done. That's why we're not pulling our sponsorship immediately. But if Robert does come back, then we will.
Thank you.
Yep.
Lynn, you've been honest in some of your public statements and your writings, acknowledging that from a strictly financial point of view, there can be short-term pain and even potentially long-term pain in taking ESG seriously. The returns come in other forms, not just financial, but of course, not everyone cares about the other kinds of return. The people that are still freedmen disciples. Maybe they pretend to, they don't really, maybe they're somewhere in between. Over the years that you've spent spreading the word of inclusive capitalism, what have you learned about overcoming that kind of resistance from the people who just don't value the goals of ESG really at all? Can these folks be reached, and if so, how?
Well, first of all, we are talking about capitalism, so financial returns are really critical. There has got to be profit and there has got to be return in what we do. So our belief is that capital, first of all, needs to be long-term. Most institutional capital is investing for pension funds and college endowments and foundations. And I remember being at a meeting with a big pension fund that's invested with us, and I just wanted to see the way they operated. And the CEOs and the management, they were all up on stage, and this 30-year-old woman stood up and she said, "I want you to invest in companies that are creating the kind of world I want to retire into." And that kind of says it all. And that's how we want our investments. They have to return financially. So what I call issues around how people treat their workers, how people treat their planet, is I often say they're not yet financial, but they will be financial. Because if you lose your customers, your employees, or your community, you're not going to exist. I spoke before about the J&J Credo. There's a great book by Roger Martin called Fixing the Game. And if you like the NFL, not the NBA, but anyway, he uses the NFL as his metaphor for this book. And he contrasts J&J's financial performance with their credo to Jack Welch and General Electric. And Jack Welch never missed a quarterly projection. From 1981 till 2001, he never missed one. J&J stock and GE stock performed the same IRR during that period. But after Jack was there, GE is down 80%, J&J is up 130%. So those short-term measures that Jack Welch took to create shareholder value didn't work out so well for the long term. So I have no apology about believing the importance in investing in companies that truly have a purpose. I think Dan was absolutely right to start with the mission and the purpose of a company, and then making sure your customers understand it, your employees understand it, so there are no surprises out there. Everything is aligned with the business purpose, and then you also have the financial return. So to me, it's not an either or. It's a little bit of a time horizon issue in some cases. And if a company is on, if a company is on fire, you can't start talking about, long-term plans. You have to put out the fire, you have to fix the company. It has to be financially relevant. And then you have the luxury of being a long-term company.
Right.
I couldn't agree more with what Lynn said. Like, this idea that profit and purpose work against each other is ridiculous. To Lynn's point, there may be a timing issue, but if you don't have a purpose as a company, then you will sub-optimize shareholder return over the medium to the long term. I firmly believe the best route to maximizing shareholder return is by having a purpose as a company. And because you attract the very best employees. When you attract the very best employees, you serve customers better than anybody else. And then that leads to increased loyalty, better revenues, all the things that shareholders are looking for a company. Increasingly, those shareholders are looking for more as well. They realize that if we live in a divided country, if we have a country of haves and have-not, that is not good for our economy. It is not good for our democracy. That does not bode well over the medium to long term for any company. It's easy to maximize profits next quarter. It's easy to go do that. You cut back on certain things, you do that. That may satisfy some shareholders, but the vast majority of shareholders are thinking about and are giving you multiples based on what do they think that your long-term growth opportunities are about. And so I think Lynn is right. it's a very difficult time. You need to focus on the fundamentals of your business. You can't be a profitable company that's not profitable. That's like not going to happen over the long run. You can't be impactful if that's the case. But I am this firm believer that that having a sense of mission, a sense of values over the medium and long term maximizes shareholder return.
Let's end there. That is a perfect way to stop. Dan Schulman, Lynn Forrest with the Rothschild, thank you very much.